In May of 1945, an American surgeon stood inside a captured German hospital south of Bologna and looked at a shelf that should not have been empty. His name was Colonel Hugh R. Gilmore, Jr. He was not looking for morphine. He was not looking for scalpels. He was not looking for bandages. He was looking for blood. Not a donor in the next room. Not a desperate arm-to-arm transfusion. He was looking for refrigerated, typed, bottled whole blood. The kind American field hospitals had been receiving for months by truck, by aircraft, by insulated crate, and sometimes by hand through mud and shellfire. There was none. No bottles, no labels, no cold storage. No blood typing kits waiting beside the operating tables. Gilmore and the 7 American medical officers with him moved to the next German installation. The same. Then the next. The same again. Across the German military hospitals they inspected in Italy, the absence repeated itself so completely that it stopped looking like shortage and started looking like doctrine. The army of one of the most medically advanced nations in the world had reached the end of the war without a working battlefield blood bank system. And men had died from bleeding because the one thing that could replace blood was not there. That is the question hidden inside those empty shelves. Not how the United States learned to fly blood across an ocean, though that part is astonishing. The harder question is this: how did the country that helped create modern transfusion science fail to use it when its own wounded were dying? To answer that, we have to follow one glass bottle. Not the famous weapons, not the tanks, not the landing craft. A glass bottle, filled with dark red civilian blood, packed in ice, placed aboard an aircraft in the United States, and carried toward a surgical tent in Europe where a soldier had already lost too much of his own. The bottle was fragile. The chain around it was not, and by 1945, that chain had become one of the most important machines the American Army ever built. It began 4 decades earlier, in Vienna, with a man mixing blood on glass slides. In 1901, Karl Landsteiner worked at the University of Vienna in the middle of the German-speaking medical world. At the time, transfusion was still half science and half gamble. One patient might recover. Another might convulse and die. Doctors could describe the disaster, but they could not reliably predict it. Landsteiner took blood from colleagues, separated the cells from the serum, and began crossing one sample with another. Sometimes the red cells clumped. Sometimes they stayed smooth. From those patterns came the first blood groups, A, B, and C, later understood as O. A fourth group, AB, followed soon after through the work of his students. That simple laboratory pattern changed the meaning of transfusion. Blood was no longer a mystery fluid. It had types. Give the wrong type, and the body could attack it. Give a compatible type, and the blood could circulate as life. The irony is almost too sharp to miss. The discovery that made modern transfusion possible came out of the same scientific world that Nazi Germany would later claim as evidence of its superiority. German-speaking medicine had the knowledge before almost anyone. But knowledge is not a supply chain, and a discovery in a laboratory does not save a man bleeding in a ditch unless an army builds a way to carry it to him. The first glimpse of that future appeared in the First World War. By 1915, surgeons on the Western Front were using blood grouping to make transfusions safer. The method worked. It also demanded a donor lying beside the wounded man while the surgeon connected one body to another. That was possible in a hospital. It was absurd in a collapsing casualty station near artillery. You could not keep enough donors close to the front. You could not move them fast enough. You could not ask a healthy soldier to lie beside a dying one under shell fire while tubing ran between their arms. The science was ready. The battlefield was not. Then Captain Oswald Hope Robertson saw the missing piece. Robertson was an American physician serving with the British. He had studied blood preservation at the Rockefeller Institute in New York. He understood what citrate could do. It could keep blood from clotting. He understood what cold could do. It could slow decay. But more importantly, he understood what storage could do. It could separate the donor from the wound. That was the revolution. Blood could be taken behind the lines, preserved in bottles, packed in ice, and sent forward before the next wave of wounded arrived. During the Battle of Cambrai in 1917, Robertson used stored blood on wounded soldiers near the front. It was a small operation by later standards, but the meaning was enormous. For a brief moment, the future of combat medicine was visible. Then the war ended. Armies cut budgets. Hospitals absorbed lessons slowly. Military planners moved on. The idea did not disappear. It survived in scattered civilian blood banks in the Soviet Union, Britain, and the United States. But as a military system, it went quiet. When war returned in 1939, most armies still had no way to deliver stored whole blood at scale. The lesson had been written down. It had not been built. The next major leap came from a surgeon who knew exactly what blood could do, and exactly what prejudice could do to blood once politics touched it. Charles Richard Drew arrived at Columbia University in the late 1930s to study blood preservation. He was young, brilliant, methodical, and black in a medical world that made him prove every inch of ground twice. His doctoral work, completed in 1940, became one of the foundational studies of modern blood banking. Drew understood plasma. Plasma is the liquid part of blood after the red cells are removed. It can restore volume, it can help lift blood pressure, and when dried into powder, it can be shipped without refrigeration and used without matching blood type. For logistics officers, it looked like a miracle. No cold chain, no typing at the front, no fragile fresh blood schedule. When Britain was under air attack in 1940, Drew helped organize the Blood for Britain program in New York. Thousands of donations were collected, processed, and sent across the Atlantic as plasma. It was the first large international blood supply operation of its kind. Then Drew helped design the early American Red Cross blood bank system. The system he shaped would help collect millions of donations during the war. And then the United States military told that system to segregate blood from black donors. Drew objected because the science was clear. Blood had types. Blood did not have race. He had built his career proving that the body obeyed biology, not racial categories. But the Army and Navy accepted blood through the filter of a social lie. Drew resigned. That decision matters because it exposes one of the deepest contradictions in the American story. The United States would build the most successful wartime blood supply chain on Earth while still separating blood by race. It would use the science correctly enough to save thousands of men, and wrongly enough to humiliate the very truth on which the science depended. The same contradiction would appear again on Omaha Beach. But first, plasma had to reveal its limit. By the middle of the war, American dried plasma was everywhere. It could be packed in kits. It could be dropped by parachute. It could be carried by medics into places no truck could reach. For a wounded man in shock, plasma could look like salvation. His pressure rose, his pulse steadied, his skin looked less gray, he might even speak again. But plasma carried almost no oxygen. Red blood cells did that. A soldier who lost 3 pints of blood and received 3 pints of plasma had more circulating fluid, but not more oxygen-carrying red cells. His heart could pump again. But it was pumping a fluid that could not do the full work of blood. That meant the most dangerous moments sometimes came after the apparent rescue. A man would arrive at a forward hospital pale, cold, and nearly drained. Plasma would raise his pressure enough for surgery. The surgeon would open him, and the operation would cause more blood loss. Then the small number of red cells left in his body would fall below survival level. His pressure had lied, his color had lied. The plasma had bought time, but not oxygen, and on the table he would collapse. That was the lethal pattern American surgeons began seeing in North Africa, Sicily, and Italy. Major Henry Beecher, an anesthesiologist in the Mediterranean theater, described it with the anger of a doctor who had watched it happen too often. A badly wounded man received plasma, looked stable, went to surgery, lost the last hemoglobin he could spare, and could not be revived. The solution was not more plasma. The solution was whole blood. The British understood that earlier. Under Brigadier Lionel Whitby, the British Army Blood Transfusion Service built a system to collect blood, store it, and move it forward to surgical units. British experience in North Africa and the Mediterranean made the lesson blunt. Plasma helped. Whole blood saved the worst cases. American surgeons fighting beside British units could see it. They saw British casualties receiving whole blood while American casualties often received only plasma. They wrote reports. They asked for a similar system. They pushed the case upward. Washington resisted. Whole blood spoiled. Whole blood needed cold storage. Whole blood needed typed bottles, tracking, inspection, transport, and speed. Plasma was simple, and large institutions have a dangerous habit. They confuse simple with sufficient. In October 1943, Lieutenant Colonel Douglas Kendrick, working on blood and plasma transfusion questions for the Surgeon General, argued that the United States needed to airlift whole blood to the European theater. The plan was practical. It was rejected. A more detailed airlift proposal followed in November. That was rejected too. So through the winter of 1943 and the spring of 1944, American soldiers kept arriving in surgical tents with enough plasma to raise their pressure and not enough red cells to survive the knife. The bottle existed. The aircraft existed. The doctors knew the need. The chain had not been given permission to exist. On June 6, 1944, that failure reached Omaha Beach. The medics landing with the assault units carried bandages, morphine, sulfa, tourniquets, and plasma. They did not carry whole blood. No one on the beach had a working whole blood supply system behind him. The water was cold enough to shrink veins. Aid bags were lost in the surf. Glass broke against obstacles. Men lay in the tide with abdominal wounds, torn limbs, and blood spreading into the sand faster than plasma could replace what mattered. Plasma could buy minutes. Whole blood might have bought lives. Among the men who came ashore that day was Corporal Waverly Woodson, Jr., a medic with the 320th Barrage Balloon Battalion. The 320th was the only all-black combat unit to land on Omaha Beach. Woodson's landing craft was hit. Shrapnel tore into him before he even reached the sand. He was wounded in the leg and hip, bleeding himself, and still he pulled himself into the fight that would define the rest of his life. For roughly 30 hours, Woodson treated casualty after casualty. He gave plasma. He dressed wounds. He dragged men from the water. He worked airways. He amputated a trapped foot. He kept moving until his own blood loss finally forced him down. The army he served in would not even mix his blood with white blood in its own supply system. But on that beach, Woodson did not ask whose life was worth saving. He treated the man in front of him. That is why the lack of whole blood on D-Day is not just a logistics failure. It is a moral image. An injured black medic in a segregated army was doing everything a human body could do with 2 hands and an aid bag, while the institution behind him had still not built the chain that surgeons had been begging for. The blood system that later ran across Europe was not available to him. It should have been. After Normandy, no one could pretend the problem was theoretical. The hedgerow fighting produced wounds that plasma could not solve. Shattered limbs, torn vessels, penetrating abdominal injuries, men surviving the trip to the operating table, then dying because the red cells were gone. Brigadier General Paul Hawley, the chief surgeon in the European theater, had already supported hospital blood banks in England using service troops as donors. By July 1944, the theater blood bank at Salisbury was collecting blood and sending it across the channel. It was not enough. The theater was consuming blood faster than local donors could provide it. So Hawley and Colonel Elliot Cutler flew to Washington in August. They carried casualty figures, surgical reports, and the authority of men who had watched plasma fail. This time, the answer changed. The United States authorized the whole blood airlift. The plan finally accepted was close to the plan Kendrick had pushed months earlier. Nothing fundamental had changed except the number of dead men behind the argument. Then the machine came alive. In American cities, civilian donors stepped into Red Cross centers and offered a pint of blood. The blood was typed. Type O was prized because it could be used broadly in emergency conditions. It was mixed with preservative first Alcevers solution and later acid citrate dextrose, sealed in bottles, inspected, labeled, packed into insulated containers, and rushed toward eastern airfields. Then Air Transport Command took over. Douglas C-54 Skymasters carried the blood across the Atlantic. The flights were cold, unpressurized, and uncomfortable. Crews flew high in heavy clothing and oxygen masks while cases of bottled blood rode with mail, medical freight, and war cargo. No pilot knew the donor, no donor knew the patient. The chain worked because every stranger in it trusted the next stranger. At Prestwick in Scotland, the blood was inspected and re-iced. From there it moved onward to France, where the central distribution depot near Paris sorted bottles, repacked them, and sent them forward. Refrigerated trailers could carry about 1,000 pints. Trucks ran at night. Aircraft carried smaller loads to forward strips. Jeeps took cases along roads that might no longer be roads by morning. In the last mile, blood sometimes moved in the hands of a man walking bent against artillery. A bottle drawn in New York or Washington could reach a European hospital in 4 to 6 days. Properly refrigerated, blood preserved in Alciver's solution could remain usable for about 21 days. That gave the Army a moving window of life. Between late August 1944 and VE Day, more than 200,000 pints of whole blood were airlifted from the United States to the European theater. Across the theater, more than 300,000 pints were transfused into casualties. Patton's Third Army alone used tens of thousands. The Pacific built its own chain too, including vast demands for Okinawa. This was not a side program. It was a battlefield weapon whose ammunition was donated by civilians and fired through needles. Captain Robert Harden, who commanded the European Theater Blood Bank, had no finished manual for what he was being asked to do. He studied with Whitby's British service, adapted what worked, then built the American network under pressure. Problems appeared constantly. Containers failed, roads changed, hospitals moved, front lines bent, bottles broke. Equipment designed for calm hospitals had to function in tents, barns, cellars, and half-ruined buildings, so medical officers improvised. Majors Richard Ebert and Charles Emerson developed a more reliable transfusion set from available components because the standard equipment was not good enough for the field. That is a small detail with a large meaning. The American blood program did not succeed only because generals approved it. It succeeded because people close to the problem kept solving the next problem without waiting for perfection. A donor gave, a nurse labeled, a driver iced, a pilot flew, a depot sorted, a surgeon ordered, a medic hung the bottle. The chain was not one invention. It was thousands of small refusals to let distance be an excuse. That is what makes the German failure so hard to explain. Germany did not lack doctors. German and Austrian medicine had been central to world science for generations. Its universities had trained physicians from across the world. Its pharmaceutical and chemical industries were enormous. Landsteiner's discovery belonged to that scientific universe before it belonged to anyone else. The Germans had the journals, they had trained surgeons, they had Robertson's example, they had chemistry, they had military organization. What they did not have was a system that treated the severely wounded man as worth the cost of saving. When Gilmore's team examined German hospitals in Italy, they found transfusion practice stuck in an older world. Direct transfusion, donor to patient, arm to arm, a limited volume, when a donor could be found, when time allowed, when the patient survived long enough. When that was not possible, German doctors could use substitutes such as Peristin, a polyvinyl pyrrolidone solution designed to restore blood volume. It could raise pressure, it could not carry oxygen. It was, in the deepest sense, another version of the same illusion plasma could create. A heart might pump. The tissues might still starve. The German system also had severe shortages of plasma, no comparable banked whole blood program at the front, and no penicillin in the Allied sense. German surgeons were often skilled. Their hospitals could be orderly. Their evacuation procedures were not primitive. But the system made a brutal calculation. Lightly wounded men could return to duty quickly. Severely wounded men needed blood, time, transport, surgical labor, and weeks of recovery. If resources were scarce, the lightly wounded won. That was not just triage under pressure. Every army triages under pressure. This was a pattern of medical value. American inspectors believed the German medical mission had accepted a lower moral ceiling. Save the man who can return to the line. Spend less on the man who probably cannot. The Americans were not saints. Their own system had delayed whole blood, their own military segregated blood. Their own black medics could save 200 men and still be denied the recognition they had earned. But in the blood program, the American army eventually crossed a line the German army did not. It decided that the man bleeding out in surgery was worth a continental supply chain. Not because he would fight again. Because he was alive. And because the means existed. Germany's failure had several roots. The first was logistics. By 1944, Germany was fighting a gigantic land war under bombing, fuel shortage, rail strain, and collapse. The Eastern Front consumed men and vehicles at a scale that shredded ordinary planning. Refrigerated transport and spare aircraft were not easy luxuries. But logistics alone cannot explain the absence. The British built a blood system with fewer resources than the Americans and under enormous pressure. It was smaller, but it existed. If Germany had placed comparable priority on the severely wounded, some version of a system could have been built. The second route was what the Nazi regime had done to medicine itself. Beginning in 1933, Jewish physicians, professors, and researchers were expelled from universities, hospitals, and public service. Many of them were among the elite of German medical science. Many left for Britain, the United States, and elsewhere. The regime had cut intelligence out of its own body. Then it wondered why the body weakened. The third route was ideology. The Nazi state applied racial categories to blood in a world where the science had already shown the relevant categories were ABO groups, not invented racial purity. The United States also stained its own blood program with segregation. That remains part of the story. But Nazi racial medicine went further and deeper. It made false biological hierarchy part of state truth. And once ideology outranks physiology, wounded men become victims twice. First of the shell that tears them open. Then of the lie that decides whose blood counts. By December 1944, the American blood chain had its greatest test. The Ardennes offensive erupted through Belgium and Luxembourg on December 16. German forces smashed into a thin Allied front. Roads disappeared into snow, traffic jams, panic, and shellfire. Hospitals that had been behind the line became dangerously close to it. Units that were supposed to receive routine supply suddenly needed emergency surgery capacity. A blood distribution system designed for a moving front had to become flexible overnight. The chain held because the people inside it bent without breaking. Trucks were rerouted. Aircraft were diverted. Rear hospitals gave up reserves. British blood supplies helped fill gaps. Drivers took crates of blood along frozen roads where German armor might appear ahead of them. At the peak of the crisis, Allied forward hospitals were receiving huge daily quantities of whole blood under conditions that could destroy blood just as surely as heat could. It had to stay cold, but not freeze. That detail sounds small until you picture a driver in the Ardennes snow-checking bottles that could not become ice and could not become warm, while the road ahead might already be under fire. Around Bastogne, where the 101st Airborne was surrounded, medical supplies came by air when the weather opened. Bundles landed in snow. Men ran to recover them. Blood that had begun as a quiet civilian donation now entered a siege perimeter. That was the full meaning of the chain. A bottle could leave a donor's arm in America, cross an ocean, pass through depots and trucks and aircraft, and end up in a cellar where a medic hung it above a wounded paratrooper while artillery shook plaster from the ceiling. 14 months earlier, the Army had called the idea impractical. Now the idea was keeping men alive. Across the world, on Okinawa, another medic was proving the same national instinct in a different form. Desmond Doss, a Seventh-day Adventist from Lynchburg, Virginia, refused to carry a weapon. His comrades had mocked him in training. Some officers had wanted him gone. But on the Maida Escarpment, the Coral Cliff Americans called Hacksaw Ridge, Doss crawled through fire to reach wounded men and lowered them down the cliff one by one. He is credited with saving about 75. Doss and Woodson were nothing alike on paper. One was white and a conscientious objector. One was black and served in a segregated unit. One received the Medal of Honor. The other waited almost 80 years for the Distinguished Service Cross and still remains tied to a larger argument about recognition denied. But under fire, they answered the same question. When a man is dying in front of you, who acts? Not the perfect institution, not the completed manual, not the future investigation. You do. That answer runs through the blood chain, as much as it runs through any battlefield act of courage. The whole blood program was not heroic in the cinematic way. Most of it happened far from the camera. A woman rolling up her sleeve in Washington. A lab worker reading a label twice. A transport crew flying cold cargo over the Atlantic. A depot officer checking bottles under tired light. A driver keeping a crate from freezing. A surgeon choosing to operate because now, finally, he had blood. No single person could see the whole system, but every person could hold one link. And that was enough. The numbers show what changed. In the First World War, a much higher share of American soldiers who reached care after being wounded still died of their wounds. In the Second World War, that rate fell dramatically. The official explanations included better forward surgery, faster evacuations, sulfa drugs and penicillin, plasma, and whole blood. Not one miracle, a convergence. But whole blood belonged near the center because it attacked the wound at its most basic level. A man who had lost blood needed blood. Not theory, not optimism, not pressure without oxygen. Blood. The uncomfortable truth is that the Americans were late. The system that began in August 1944 should have started earlier. The plan had been visible in 1943. Surgeons in the field had already seen the deaths. British practice had already shown the answer. Every month of delay had a human cost. But late is not the same as never. When the decision finally came, the Americans built at scale, adapted under fire, and pushed the bottle farther forward than any army had done before. The German army, with all its scientific inheritance, never built an equivalent frontline whole blood system. Not because it had never heard of the science. Because science alone does not decide what an army values. Karl Landsteiner lived long enough to see transfusion become safe, but not long enough to see the full wartime chain his discovery made possible. He died in New York in 1943. Charles Drew died in 1950, only 45 years old, after building systems that saved lives while standing against the racial lie imposed on them. Douglas Kendrick's rejected plan became the Army's accepted plan. Robert Hardin helped turn that plan into a working theater network. Lionel Whitby and the British service proved whole blood could move toward battle. Henry Beecher and field surgeons forced the medical reality into language Washington could no longer avoid. Waverly Woodson carried the contradiction onto Omaha Beach in his own wounded body. Desmond Doss carried wounded men off a ridge without carrying a rifle. And thousands of donors, nurses, technicians, drivers, pilots, corpsmen, surgeons, and medics carried a chain none of them could complete alone. That is what Gilmore's empty shelves revealed. The difference was not that one side had science and the other did not. Both knew enough. The difference was what happened after the knowledge existed. One system let the most expensive wounded men slide toward death because saving them took too much. The other system argued, delayed, contradicted itself, stained its own science with racism, then finally decided that a dying man was worth the aircraft, the ice, the bottle, the road, the driver, the needle, and the stranger's blood. That is why the glass bottle matters. It was not just medicine. It was a vote cast by an entire chain of people. A vote against distance. A vote against bureaucracy. A vote against the idea that a man stops being worth saving when he becomes difficult to save. In the German hospital in Italy, Gilmore found no bottles. On the American side, by the end of the war, the bottles were everywhere. Moving through airports, stacked in depots, riding in trucks, hanging above operating tables, held by medics whose names were never recorded. And each one carried the same silent answer. A soldier was bleeding, someone had the blood, someone else had the means to move it, so they moved it.